Did you notice that this show doesn't have any commercials? I'm not selling you diapers or vitamins or smoothies or gasoline. That's because I don't want corporate sponsors telling us what to investigate and what to say. Instead, you're our sponsors. This is a production by our nonprofit, the Informed Consent Action Network. If you want more investigations, more hard-hitting news, if you want the truth, go to ICanDecide.org and donate now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are out there in the world. It's time to step out onto the Highwire, and boy, are we in a good mood as we're broadcasting from Austin, Texas. That's right, everybody in Texas, at least those of us that don't like masks and don't like having to wear them, not just because they're useless and ineffective or because they're bad for our health and our sanity, but simply because it's ridiculous and unconstitutional. Well, if you haven't gotten the news, here's the headline just over this last week. Governor Greg Abbott ends statewide mask mandate, moves to open Texas. Not 50%, not 60%, not 75%, 100% open in Texas. That's what Greg Abbott has paved the way. Well, you would think, based on all of the Texans that are jumping up and down their yards and waving that Lone Star State flag, that everybody's excited about it. But that's not exactly how it was covered in the news. It looked like this.
Effective next Wednesday, all businesses of any type are allowed to open 100%. Also, I am ending the statewide mask mandate.
Look, nobody likes what we're doing, but how can you cheer?
There is no upside to repealing a mask mandate at this point in the pandemic.
Governor Abbott has lost his mind.
Yes, Greg Abbott is an idiot.
Today, Governor Greg Abbott rescinded the state's mask mandate and declared Texas open for business, despite all the federal guidance that masks are key to preventing a new wave of COVID cases and deaths.
Texas is rolling back its COVID restrictions, despite fears that they may be staring at a fourth wave. No mask, no problem.
Think about that. Any business, there are lots of, say, nightclubs in Texas. You think nightclubs are a good thing to operate right now?
What Greg Abbott did today was deeply misguided, and it's all for show.
We're so close to a point where we're going to have vaccines for all high-risk people. This feels just a little too premature.
If you prematurely lift the restrictions, we have a few examples of the rebound back.
Another incredibly unhealthy, dangerous move.
Doesn't he know we're in the middle of a dark winter? We are not allowed to end the dark winter now. He's crazy. He's out of his mind. He's going to get everybody killed. That's basically the vibe from mainstream media. There's lots of speculation on why he did this. Is he really doing it because he cares about Texans? And there's a lot of people that never wanted these mask mandates that think this should have never happened to begin with, so why are we celebrating him? Well, we are celebrating the idea of being free, and that's something that Texas likes a lot. But when we look at it, I think that one of the arguments they've made of why he maybe did it was we had CPAC last week, and it was announced that Ron DeSantis in Florida came in second. They did a straw poll or a poll at CPAC. Who would you like to see as the next running for the Republican Party next election? Trump was in first place. But right behind him, Ron DeSantis came in second. I think Trump had somewhere around 55% of the votes. Ron DeSantis had about 22%. And my understanding is Greg Abbott had 0%. Maybe he wants to run for president, and maybe he thinks that he's got to follow in Ron DeSantis' footsteps. Or maybe he just wants to get reelected as governor. I think a more important point that nobody was talking about in the news is the fact that just over a week or two ago, we had an assembly member here in Texas run bills against the mask mandate, basically saying that they're unconstitutional, that Abbott got outside of his constitutional space or place in this world. And so maybe Abbott's trying to get in front of being an unconstitutional governor. But either way, when they talk about it's too early, as they very well pointed out, he hasn't got enough vaccines in Texas to claim the win. Well, maybe the win's going to come from somewhere else. Let's look at the graphs of what's actually happening in Texas. This is fascinating. These are new confirmed cases here in Texas. This is obviously what his health department's been looking at to help him make make this decision? New confirmed cases. Right at the turn of 2021 in January, we're at about 20,000 cases, new confirmed cases. That's now dropped to below 5,000. That's roughly a 75% reduction in new confirmed cases just over the last really 2 months. Let's look at the next graph. This is hospitalizations in Texas. We were up around, an ongoing 14,000 hospitalizations from COVID right in January at the top of the peak, and now we've dropped below what appears to be about 5,000 hospitalizations. That's a 65% reduction in hospitalizations. And let's look at the big whammer, right? This is the thing we always cared about. We don't care if we got a cold or the sniffles or we're getting sick. How many people are dying? Well, these are the death rates based on the numbers coming from the health department here in Texas. We were up around 350 deaths per day at the peak of this last resurgence over the holidays. It's usually, this is the flu, right? This is a flu season or a cold season. These are the holidays. This is what we're used to. It's dropped from about 350 down to 100. That's a reduction of roughly 70%. Why are we talking about this? Obviously, everything's moving in the right direction. It happens to be moving in the exact same direction of every cold and flu season since the dawn of man. And they always disappear without a vaccine. They always go right out the door about the time the sun starts shining, sometime right after a super ice freeze hits Texas. But anyway, that's where we're at. Those are the facts. Now, when they talk about it, well, there's not enough vaccinations in Texas, I think they're really pointing to their real issue. And this is what it is. Let's look at Texas vaccination rates right now for COVID-19. You have about 13% that have gotten the first dose, but everyone knows that they're getting infected after the first dose. They're saying it's basically ineffective. You got to have 2 doses. And for 2 doses, only 7.5% of Texans have gotten their second dose. So beware, people. They're going to try and rewrite this history. They're going to try to say across the country, the virus disappeared, the pandemic was ended by the vaccine. They did this with polio. They've done this with smallpox. They've tried to do this multiple different ways by changing the numbers. But here's what you have to know if you even passed through 3rd grade math. You cannot get a 75% reduction in new confirmed cases when you only vaccinated 7.5% of your population. You don't get to a 65% reduction in hospitalizations by only vaccinating 7.5% of your population, and you definitely don't drop mortality 70% when you only vaccinate 7.5% of the population. What they are really afraid of is that this entire thing in Texas is going to show to the world the vaccine had nothing to do with the end of this pandemic, and perhaps masks and lockdowns never worked. Why do I say that? Because Texas isn't the first one to do this. There are other states, in fact, there's 15 other states that don't have mandates right now as we speak. But let's look at how the news treated the last governor that decided to be insane enough to open up his state. This is Florida.
Don't expect any more restrictions or mask mandates here in Florida.
DeSantis, while encouraging mask wearing, has issued no statewide mandate on masks in Florida.
The governor stripped them the ability to enforce guidelines and restrictions.
Other states have tried to lock people down. We've tried to lift people up.
And the cases, they are rising here in Florida. But Governor Ron DeSantis said that he does not believe in mandates. In fact, he called the effectiveness of lockdowns a lie.
The lie of the lockdown was if you just lock down, then you can beat the virus. Well, why are people having to lock down 2 or 3 times then?
Governor Ron DeSantis lifted all statewide COVID restrictions in September and banned local governments from enforcing mask mandates. These mayors say fines worked, and they want to bring it back.
We are in more than a precarious situation, and the governor, who seems just entrenched in following a convenient ideology rather than established science, is not helping us. He is actually poo-pooing the idea of mask usage as something that could help, which makes no sense.
They swore to us that by opening up Florida, we would see dramatic increases in death, hospitalizations, and new cases. But nothing could be further from the truth. This is a great article that came out from rationalground.com. Florida's COVID-19 response has outperformed lockdown states on excess deaths, education, and the economy. Let's look at some of the graphs from this great article. Okay, let's look all the way back here. Right around September 25th, everyone's running about neck and neck. Of course, we're going to be comparing comparing Florida to New York and California. New York and California, the hyper lockdown states, right? Let's see what happened. Everyone's tracking about the same. Then around November 16th, right here, Gavin Newsom runs and closes all indoor dining. And then by December 6th, that's not good enough. He decides to say, you got to stay locked in your homes. This is a stay-at-home order. Now, similar things were happening with Andrew Cuomo in New York. And I don't know if you remember, but right about here, around November 23rd, this is where what Cuomo's doing is so awesome that he's winning an Emmy Award for his work. And Fauci is saying, this is one of the best responses the world has ever seen. Boy, we love ourselves some Andrew Cuomo. But look what happens to this graph. Remember, Newsom, Cuomo really leading the charge in destroying our civil rights, and California goes up through the roof, this insane rise. Now, I suppose you might be attributing some of this to Gavin Newsom's dinner at French Laundry, but I doubt you can blame all of this spike on him and the 12 people he was dining with. But look, at New York fared about the same as Florida, but who crossed the finish line in first place? Florida did. Even though we were all promised that Ron DeSantis was going to destroy Florida and put us all at risk, it came out better when it came to daily new cases per 1 million. All right, let's look at another graph here, shall we? Here we go. All right, this is hospitalizations per 1 million. This is a really important stat. Once again, back here on September 25th, everyone's running neck and neck. The same thing. We see December 6th, and this is what's interesting. Fauci's screaming how great Cuomo's doing. We've got California locking everybody in the home. Everybody right here is doing almost exactly the same. But that orange line, they're not locking anybody down. They're not forcing any masks. In fact, DeSantis is saying, you decide to even press charges on anybody, I'm going to nullify any charges. And what happens? California spikes, New York spikes, and Florida barely moves at all. And it comes out where? In first place over those two other states. You really can't beat this. This is science. This is what we can do, right? We actually have the facts. Now let's look at associated deaths. And this is, of course, in seniors. This is per 100,000 deaths in our high-risk group. What do we see? Obviously, this is what Cuomo's in a lot of heat over. 1,066 deaths per 100,000 New York. One of the worst stats we've seen anywhere in the country and, frankly, anywhere in the world. The national average was about 666. California comes in at 573 deaths in their seniors per 100,000. And who does best, once again? Florida at 474 deaths per 100,000. Where is the deaths? And by the way, isn't this where everybody goes, the snowbirds? Isn't like this snowbird central? Shouldn't this be where we see the highest rate of deaths in seniors? Instead, it's the lowest of these three states, the only one that didn't lock down. Now, you could argue that these are similar, and I'll even take that argument. Even if they're similar, the point is Florida didn't lock down, Florida didn't mask, and even if they did the same, doesn't that prove that masking and lockdowns are a total disaster and a waste of time? Let's look at another stat, and this is a really huge one right now, given the discussions about getting our kids back into school. Of course, you've got pushback from many of the teachers' unions. This is percent of students offered in-person instruction. This is the schools that stayed open so that your children didn't have to sit at a computer screen, which almost every single stat is saying the kids aren't learning, it's failing them. They are going into depression. They're falling apart. They're turning to drugs, and suicides are at an all-time high. Well, what happens if you didn't lock down your schools? What would that do in the United States of America? Well, luckily, we have Florida as the example. Look at this. 99.8% of in-person learning continued in Florida. If we go down the list, Ohio really dropped down 31% in-person learning, 8.5% in Illinois. But look at this, California, 5.4% of their students. I'm going to assume that those were extremely rich private schools. I don't know. Maybe I'm jumping the gun there. Either way, only 5.4% of children got a decent education in California. But what did it do to the overall numbers? Because this is what matters, right? Well, when it comes to pediatric cases per 100,000, how many kids were getting infected with SARS-CoV-2, 3,794 in the state that kept everybody in school. Where was California at, where no one went to school? 4,724 cases, nearly 1,000 more cases per 100,000 because they shut down the schools. I don't know what you have to see here. I don't know what kind of science they think they're going to get away with, and I don't know why they're screaming at Abbott, because none of this stuff seems to have had any effect. In fact, it seemed to have backfired on them. Well, what is that doing for Florida? Let's look at Florida's home sales, shall we? The orange is where they were in 2019. Look at the time where it starts opening up. They are having skyrocketing home sales now as you look into December. And I imagine right now, based on everything that we see and everyone that's going to watch this show right now, when we go and check out where their home sales right now, I'll bet you they're going to be something like this. Because as it turns out, Americans love living in a state that believes in being free and allowing you to make your own health decisions. And lastly, I think this is one of my favorite graphs. This is a little bit of Americana for you, shall we? This is U-Haul. These are U-Haul, one-way U-Hauls going into a state, meaning people are moving into those states. What state had the fewest amount of U-Hauls arriving with people that wanted to be there? You guessed it, none other than California, coming in dead last, 50th. There are fewer people in the United States of America that want to live in California than anywhere else. Where's really coming in close? Coming in at 42nd, least likely place you want to move to is New York. And then third highest, and I would guess Texas and probably Idaho are in this too, but Florida is ranking at the top of the list where people are migrating to as we speak. In fact, I think if you looked at it, you probably got a traffic jam in the lights if you look at nighttime or through the satellites coming in from New York and from California into Florida. There may be a few that are diverting right here and stopping right here, and there's going to be even more with these new, with a new lift on these restrictions. This is where we're at, right? They can try to rewrite the history. They can claim the masks work, even though they're already reneging and now making you wear 2 masks. They can try to oppress us, but in the end, the facts cannot lie. We must remember that, because who knows how they're going to try and manipulate this. Now, I have a huge show coming up. We've got, cancel culture that is attacking NYU professor Mark Crispin Miller. Why? Because he is trying to teach a critical thinking class. I'm going to talk to him, and then we're going to bring in Dr. Richard Bartlett, who brought us the Budesonide protocol. He's going to be in studio to do a victory lap right here. You're not going to want to miss that. But first, it's time for the Jackson Report. Boy, I love it when they quote scientific evidence, and we have scientific evidence to make our point. So what's going on with science in the world today, Jeffrey?
Yeah, just like that, Texas joins 15 other states without mask mandates. And a lot more science is starting to come out beyond what we already knew about the masks. So we have the psychological issues it was causing children. We obviously have the air intake issues and breathing your own
I
exhalation.
covered the air intake with my own kid, and obviously studies that show massive depression, learning deficits in children, wearing masks, inability to sleep, all of those things we reported on. But we have new information now?
We do. Let's talk nanoparticles. So this was a study that came out in January, the 1st of January, and it's titled Need for Assessing the Inhalation of Micro Nanoplastic Debris Shed from Masks, Respirators, and Homemade Face Coverings During the COVID-19 Pandemic. So what these researchers did was they used an electron microscope and scanned the internal part of the mask that faces the mouth. And here's some of the top selling masks. And here's the pictures. So what we're seeing is fibers, fragments, particles in the micro and nano size ranges everywhere. And they're loosely attached, according to the study, on the structural fibers of the product. So we have the blue arrows, and those show micro size fibers. The red arrows show particles and fragments in the submicron and nano size. So you can see they're everywhere. And like the research said, they are loosely attached. Why is this a problem? Well, as early as 2012, the University of Edinburgh in the UK was sounding the alarm with some early research that they did. And what they were finding were the nanofibers they were looking at mouse cells, and there was concern with that. And this is what they wrote at the time. Concern has been expressed that new kinds of nanofibers being made by nanotechnology industries might pose a risk because they have a similar shape to asbestos. Ken Donaldson, professor of respiratory toxicology, goes on to say nanofibers, which can be made from a range of materials, including carbon, are about 1,000 times smaller than the width of a human hair and can reach the lung cavity when inhaled. This may lead to a cancer known as mesothelioma, which is known to be caused by breathing in asbestos fibers, which are similar to nanofibers. This is really interesting research, but now it appears it's playing out in the real world. So let's go to Belgium. This is headlines from Belgium. This is translated. It says, fabric mouth masks that the government distributed for free through pharmacies may be toxic. So they distributed 15 million masks from a Luxembourg company called Avrix in June last year. And it says in this article that the textile would contain nanoparticles of silver and titanium dioxide. Inhaling this could have a negative effect on the respiratory tract, according to toxicologist Dominique Lisson. Carriers are at risk of developing pneumonia, especially if they already have underlying respiratory problems. Where have we heard respiratory problems before during the COVID-19 outbreak? Let me think.
Right.
Big problem here.
Yeah. Huge. And when you have a respiratory illness and now you're affecting the respiratory condition, and we've been talking about CO2, lack of oxygen, but I found that really interesting that when I was thinking of asbestos, you just think, well, it's just a carcinogenic material, but it's really the size of the fiber, right, that made it so dangerous. And that's really interesting that if the fiber is the same size or shape that our bodies, our lungs, what happens? It just creates inflammation and somehow the body starts fighting it and causes cancer?
Yeah, inflammation is never good in the body, and it is a warning sign, kind of a hot spot for cancer development for some people that are susceptible.
I mean, it's amazing when I see the video of, we've all seen the video of them making those masks in some sweatshop in, I don't know, Pakistan or India, and it's all over the floor. You would think that that'd be the problem, but the dirt on that floor is probably the least of your problems. Now we recognize that nanoparticles could be a serious issue. What next? I mean, I don't know how many things people need to see to say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead with Abbott and, you know, go ahead and take this mask off and follow DeSantis and all the, I guess he said 15 other states now don't have mask mandates. That's fantastic. It's great news.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting on this show, we cover narratives a lot in the media and watch how those flow and go. And one of the narratives, we're seeing kind of a pivot of the lockdowns and the coronavirus restrictions moving into like the environmental issues, carbon emissions, locking down cities. Is this good for the environment? But no one really thought to ask, how about these masks? Are these good for the environment? Disposing these, how are these going to be disposed? Because these orders throughout the world were not done in a vacuum. I mean, this was just like someone switched on a light and billions of masks are being put on faces and being produced. So there's now data that's showing this, and there's now video and information that shows this. So here's the headline. This was just from about a month or so ago. More than 1.56 billion face masks could end up polluting oceans. This is the report.
Man.
This is
we get rid of straws, right? We finally got rid of the straws because we saw one stuck in the nose of a turtle, which is horrible. But then we replace it with this insanity.
Absolutely.
1.56 billion masks in the ocean.
Right. And this was a calculation done by an organization, a marine conservation organization called Oceans Asia. This was their work. And it's important to know that according to their work, I was reading up on this before the show, the global face mask market was less than $1 billion in 2019, and now it's estimated to be almost $170 billion.
Whoa.
So again, you have this a gigantic explosion.
I invested in the wrong things, right? Should have been on masks.
Netflix,
Never.
Tesla, Bitcoin, masks. Well, let's take a look at this report. So what they were doing is they were going to these remote beaches in Soko Islands off Hong Kong. And they found, and this is what it says in the report, according to those visits, on a typical visit, our team might expect to encounter 1 or 2 face masks along with piles of other plastic pollution. However, on this occasion, 70 masks were found spread along a 100-meter stretch beach. This occurred about 6 weeks after the widespread adoption of mask wearing in Hong Kong due to COVID-19. The similar was found in France and the UK. But what's interesting about this beach was it was kind of like a test ground, a case study, because it's uninhabited. You can only get there by boat. So when they're seeing this stuff, it kind of is extrapolated out to other places as well.
Wow. Well, that's terrible, and obviously it's part of the World Economic Forum is making this huge pivot. We see Bill Gates saying, well, if you really thought COVID and this pandemic was a problem, the bigger problem is going to be global warming. Well, you're causing, and environmental issues, but we're causing, it's like we're causing as many issues as we're fixing, and we're not even talking about, the devastation from the lockdowns, but now the masks are hurting our environment. It's incredible. I wonder how much this narrative will get out there as we move into discussions about environment in line with this pandemic.
Right. And Oceans Asia is the once again is the organization that's doing this work, and you can look at that if you sign up for the newsletter. You sign up, you'll get all this information from these episodes here, and you can get the links from those as well. So let's get into what everyone's been talking about throughout this past week. This is Johnson & Johnson's emergency use authorization for their vaccine candidate. Take a look at what this looked like in the news.
It's go time for Johnson & Johnson.
A third vaccine joins the arsenal in the fight against the coronavirus.
Johnson & Johnson is going to be a game changer.
A major move in the push to get people vaccinated.
More signs of hope with more shots in arms.
With a third COVID vaccine now approved for emergency use, there is new hope that the effort to vaccinate America will speed up.
On Thursday, President Joe Biden pledged to quickly distribute J&J's vaccine pending its approval.
We have a plan to roll it out as quickly as Johnson & Johnson can make it.
Its vaccine can be stored in normal refrigerator temperatures instead of ultra-cold storage, and it's the only one that requires just a single shot.
We are delighted with the efficacy of this vaccine, particularly given the demonstration of efficacy against the variants that are circulating today.
If you go to a place and you have J&J and that's the one that's available now, I would take it. I personally would do the same thing.
And just like that, Barbara Schmallenberger became one of the very first people in the United States to receive the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
I can't believe it's over. I am so thrilled that today was my day for freedom.
We should all be encouraged by this news of a third safe and highly effective COVID-19 vaccine. The more people will get vaccinated, the faster we're going to overcome this virus and start to move back to normal.
So let's go right into their briefing document. This is from the FDA. This is the information that they use for that emergency use authorization. And let's talk vaccine efficacy. So it says in here, this is in the executive summary, vaccine efficacy against central laboratory confirmed moderate to severe critical COVID-19 was 66.9%. When considering cases occurring at least 14 days after a single dose of vaccination, and 66.1% when considering cases occurring at least 28 days after vaccination. Now here we get into the numbers. For the vaccine and placebo group, respectively, there were 116 and 348 COVID-19 cases that occurred at least 14 days after vaccination.
So to be clear, 116 people contracted COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, the infection, after receiving the vaccine in the vaccine group. I mean, I get why the placebo group is getting infected, but there you have it, 116 people, only 14 days. Incredible admission, really, when you think about the job of a vaccine is supposed to be stopping your ability to get the infection. All right, read the rest of it.
Right. And 66, 28 days later in the vaccine group compared to 193 in the placebo group. But looking through this, I want to draw people's attention to another part of this. This is table 13. And this shows after 28 days after vaccination, the very bottom line there, it's highlighted. This is over 60, yes. That means comorbidities, yes. Typically the comorbidities were mostly obesity and hypertension here. But this is a group of people that we're told is the most susceptible to COVID-19 or to mortality associated with that virus. And if you go all the way to the end, to the right, vaccine efficacy is 42.3% 28 days later. So we're talking less than a coin toss on that, and that's from the data.
Because Jeffrey, we could talk to some epidemiologists, but I was always told if you are crossing a negative line into a positive line, that means that this science is really not even dependable. You shouldn't be going from -13 to +71 as soon as you cross that zero line, you really got to question the science altogether. But they don't do that anymore. Now it's like, well, we'll still just average it out. But that's a gigantic spread when you look at that. And in many ways, we have to ask ourselves, is this thing effective at all?
Right. We're talking confidence intervals at that point, and how confident are they?
Right.
Let's talk about some of the data gaps, though. And again, this rhymes with Moderna and Pfizer's vaccines. So in the data gaps, here's the list of what we can't extrapolate from this data. Duration of protection, effectiveness in certain populations at higher risk of severe COVID-19, effectiveness in individuals previously infected with SARS-CoV-2. By the way, that's 29 million people in the US that have had positive cases. Effectiveness in pediatric populations, vaccine effectiveness against asymptomatic infection, vaccine effectiveness against long-term effects of COVID-19, vaccine effectiveness against mortality. And here we go, the effectiveness against transmission of SARS-CoV-2. So we don't know if this thing stops transmission.
Well, no doubt. Well, we know that it doesn't stop the infection because right away at 14 days, we pointed out, what do you have, like 150 something, and then 65 are still being infected at 28 days, meaning this vaccine is not stopping the infection. If it can't stop the infection, it would stand to reason it's not going to stop transmission. But nobody seems to care, you know, no matter how many times we point that out with Moderna and Pfizer. And of course, you have a lower efficacy rate even on this Johnson & Johnson. But the whole thing is it's one shot, right? I think people will put up with that sort of drop in the effectiveness if they can get it down to one shot. Because I don't know if you saw this. Did you see Ben Stein, the famous Ben Stein, when he was talking about having just received his second shot of Moderna vaccine? I mean, I think this video alone might just drive everybody to Johnson & Johnson. Take a look at this.
A word of warning to you, my fellow Americans, or whatever you are. I had the COVID booster, the Moderna, about 4 or 5 days ago, and I am still feeling wild side effects from it. Like I had the worst flu in the world, extreme shortness of breath, dizziness, fatigue, extremely irrational thinking. It has just been devastating. I'm glad I got it. Sort of glad. I don't know, I'm a little bit glad and also not quite so glad. But it has just got to be told to the people, us people, we people, us people, that this booster is a killer. I mean, it's not going to kill you literally, but it is very, very strong. Beware.
I can imagine execs, you know, around Moderna saying, what's going on? That is not what we paid Ben Stein to say. Oh, what? He didn't accept our money? He doesn't need our money? Oh, snap.
He was that close to being censored forevermore by saying it was a killer. He said, well, I got to correct that because Twitter's going to take me off.
It was
for
a
good.
killer. By the way, I mean, VAERS numbers are probably up too, right? When we're up above 1,000 now. Here it is, the actual VAERS numbers, 1,095 reported deaths as of this week from COVID-19. Now, obviously, that needs to be investigated. We're not saying that those are actual deaths, but they are reports. And as we've said before, VAERS has proven to be underreported, as is proven by that study by Harvard Medical School that said that VAERS is capturing less than 1% of the total amount of injuries. Whether that's 1%, 10%, 1,000 people, you know, is too many. And if it's more than that, God help us all. But let's get back, let's stay with Johnson & Johnson. I just wanted to throw that in there because I think you're going to see the idea that if I'm going to get sick, I only want to do it once. That second shot sounds like a doozy. We've talked about those headlines, but really the effectiveness is down and we still don't know about safety. You know, what are the long-term effects? If it's not stopping infection, it's not stopping transmission, what about antibody-dependent enhancement? I mean, certainly that's got to be a similar issue to Moderna and Pfizer, too.
Right. And there are some risks and unknown data gaps with the safety. Very similar, similar wording, similar issues. And let's take a look at this. And I feel this is so important to go over because the media and even the CDC are so gung-ho about especially vaccinating pregnant women. But this is what the data says. Safety in certain subpopulations. There are currently insufficient data to make conclusions about the safety of the vaccine in subpopulations such as children less than 18 years of age, pregnant and lactating individuals and their infants, and immunocompromised individuals. It goes on to say adverse reactions that are very uncommon or that require longer follow-up to be detected. Obviously, that's kind of like a no duh. And then we have the vaccine enhanced disease. That's the antibody dependent enhancement.
So unknown risk about that. It happened to be a risk for every animal and every animal. I just keep wanting to point this out because like I'll see guys like Peter Hota saying, these guys just play whack-a-mole. They bring up these issues and make you try to prove a negative. You can't prove a negative, whatever it is. But this isn't something we're making up. Immune enhancement issues, we're not like pulling it out of thin air and saying, well, I mean, you know, what about leprosy? I remember we saw that with Stanley Block. Are you going to ask me if it causes leprosy? No. I'm going to ask you if it's causing the problem we saw in every animal trial you tried these things on. Did you overcome that issue that got animals killed in the animal trials? Because, by the way, killing human beings, not such a good idea. But nobody seems to want to talk about it. Just la, 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 we're not looking, don't care.
Right. You mentioned Stanley Plotkin there. Very important. If anybody has not seen that, please go back to see his deposition, especially when he talked about the aborted fetal tissue that he used in the vaccination, because that is now another topic that's coming up with specifically this Johnson & Johnson vaccine. This is out of New Orleans. The Archdiocese there has released a paper. It says New Orleans Archdiocese asks Catholics to avoid Johnson & Johnson COVID vaccine. So they released a statement regarding the shot on February 26th, as soon when the authorization happened. And there's two quotes here. I'm going to read both of those because there's a point to this. It says, the Archdiocese of New Orleans, in light of guidance from the Vatican, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and the National Catholic Bioethics Center, affirm that though there was some lab testing that utilized the abortion-derived cell line, the two vaccines currently available from Pfizer and Moderna do not rely on cell lines from abortions in the manufacturing process, and therefore can be morally acceptable for Catholics, as the connection to abortion is extremely remote. Now, they didn't say zero, so it says, continues, it is under the same guidance from all those organizations that the Archdiocese must instruct Catholics that the latest vaccine from Johnson & Johnson is morally compromised, and it uses the abortion-derived cell line in development and production of the vaccine as well as testing. So what we have here is Pfizer and Moderna used a cell line called HEK293, but that was just in the confirmation phases, in the early phases.
Yeah, because we looked into this. I remember there's a lot of people reporting. We want to make sure that nobody puts out misinformation, though we're accused of it. We make sure that everything you see here is proven by science, and so we looked into that. Moderna and Pfizer did use aborted cell lines, but only in the testing on those cell lines. Those cell lines did not make it in the product, and therefore, you, with Moderna and Pfizer, at least, you have a myriad other problems we brought up, but one of your problems is not that you're injecting DNA from a dead baby into yourself or your children. We've talked about the science of the potential to mutate your stem cells if those fragments are the right size. But in this case, with this vaccine, then we asked you to look into it. Is this true? Are they right about the fact that this DNA can make it into the vaccine?
Yeah, let's look at the facts here. So we'll go right to the FDA's approval sheet. And it says in this sheet, the AD, that's adenovirus, 26 vector expressing the SARS-CoV-2 S protein is grown in PER.C6 TETR cell line in media containing amino acids and no animal-derived proteins. After propagation, the vaccine is processed through several purification steps formulated with inactive ingredients and filled into vials. So that PERC6 is from an abortion in 1985. It uses retinal tissue from that cell line to grow the adenovirus. And now when we go to
what's interesting to point out too, I think, when you say that, is we've moved out of those supposed 2 abortions back in the 1960s that they keep saying, well, it was just 2 babies aborted in the 1960s. Now you're seeing that there's more abortions happening. We've talked about the fact that China is doing water birth abortions to develop new cell cell lines. So as long as we use products that use these cell lines, we are creating a market for these things. So for people that this is an issue, it's interesting, I think, that the archbishops and the Catholic Church, as long as there's a choice, then they say don't go with this one. It's not something that we back up. But if there's no choice, as far as like the MMR or the chickenpox, varicella vaccines, hepatitis A vaccines that contain aborted fetal DNA, they're telling people go right ahead and get it because there's no choice. But what we've been saying from the beginning is if the Catholic Church would just say we don't accept it, then they would do what Moderna and Pfizer did and grow these things on other mediums, other animal mediums or plant mediums. You are not going to get rid of that DNA and this market you're creating unless you put your foot down and say, no, we're not going to recommend it, because clearly here we see there are other ways to do it. And this market should be demanding better ways, at least for those people that don't believe in injecting foreign human DNA into themselves or their children.
That's an incredible point, because it would make that market morally unacceptable,
Right.
and perhaps more importantly, it would cut at the knees all legislation off that's attempting to eliminate religious exemptions to vaccination. So that's a great point. I'm glad you mentioned that. So the residual amount in there. So the question really was that you asked me, is it in the vaccine? Is it in the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? So let's look at this this fact sheet. This is for the healthcare providers administering the vaccine. And it says each dose may also contain residual amounts of host cell proteins less than or equal to 15 micrograms and or host cell DNA less than or equal to 3 nanograms. So that is directly from the fact sheet from the FDA there.
Wow. Well, there it is. I mean, for people that matters, that's great information. Anything else we should be worried about with this vaccine that no one's talking about?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a handful of things. How long is this segment? No, we have the HIV. In 2007, there was HIV trials using an adenovirus 5 that raised concern of the infection. And this was in Science. Yeah, in Science Mag. There's a headline here. We have this. Could certain COVID-19 vaccines leave people more vulnerable to the AIDS virus? Now, they were using adenovirus 5 as the vector. So what they do is the vector is, how it was explained to me or through my research, is it's like the spaceship that carries the spike protein and the viral parts into the cell or onto the cell that attaches. So in sub-Saharan Africa, AD5, the adenovirus 5, is very prominent. So people had immunity to that, natural immunity to that already. So when they came in with this vaccine that used that vector, they're finding that males were becoming more susceptible to HIV during vaccine trials that were trying to prevent HIV. So that became a big problem.
And that, again, was Fauci, right? That's Fauci. I think Deborah Birx is in there on the HIV vaccine. Never came about. They ended up causing HIV with the vaccine, which is obviously not the desired effect. And when you mention adenovirus and immunity in Africa, I mean, if that is the vessel that's delivering, the particles that you need to get to the cell to create immunity, what if the body's already immune to it? That means you have antibodies that are going to attack that adenovirus, which is there to protect what's inside of it. But if your body attacks it, wouldn't it stand to reason that the particles will never get to the cell because our bodies are reaching out, and if we're already immune to adenovirus, we could just attack that adenovirus and it'll never make its journey to our cells?
Correct. And this is called anti-vector immune response. And this is an issue. And AstraZeneca actually used a chimp adenovirus to avoid this whole issue of prior immunity. And with Johnson & Johnson, we have an article here. It's about that anti-vector immunity. So it's called Adenovirus Vectored COVID-19 Vaccines, Efficacy During a Potential Revaccination Campaign Likely to be Stifled by Anti-Vector Response. So here they're saying, the booster shot. So once you address this thing, the boosters may become an issue. It says adenovirus vectors vaccines for COVID-19 are at a disadvantage if vaccination campaigns become periodic to combat new SARS-CoV-2 variants, or in the event of low durability, experts said. Anti-vector immune response is anticipated following the first round of vaccinations and may impact the vaccine's efficacy if the same vector is used again for revaccinations, they explained.
It makes perfect sense, right? I mean, you're injecting something. If your body creates immunity to it, the next time you try and send it in, it's never going to let it do its job. It's amazing to think that they really haven't thought these things through. And I think when we were reporting before, isn't it Russia that's thinking about having two different adenovirus, like two different vectors, use one for the first shot and a different one for the second shot? It's also why they've talked about mixing and matching with Oxford's AstraZeneca, because maybe we'll develop immunity to the first one. We can't get the second shot unless it's a different one. All of this, obviously, spelunking into our immune system. And hey, man, good luck. You know, we're hoping for the best.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly correct what you just mentioned. And in this article, they go through all these options. It's like they're trying to play catch up, saying like, well, it's out there. How do we fix this now? They even went so far as to say, well, we'll test people for the antibodies to this vector to see what they have. But I mean, in a population of hundreds of millions of people, how realistic really is that?
Yeah.
So lots of questions there, and all from a company, you know, with this vaccine, especially all from a company of Johnson & Johnson that has had historic issues.
Johnson & Johnson has been awarded to pay $8 billion in damages in a Risperdal.
Johnson & Johnson has become the fourth drug maker to settle the Ohio opioid lawsuits before going to trial.
And ordered the company to pay more than $500 million to the state.
A jury ordering the company to pay a record $417 million to a woman who claims its talcum powder caused her ovarian cancer.
J&J is facing 13,000 lawsuits over Risperdal.
J&J will settle for $20.4 million, but the deal includes no admission of liability.
Johnson & Johnson has recalled over-the-counter medications for children and adults 9 times in the last year for a range of problems.
In the first state opioid case to make it to trial, a judge in Oklahoma late today ruled Johnson & Johnson helped fuel the state's opioid crisis.
Many of these suits say the company failed to properly warn people of the risk associated with the drug.
It's not very encouraging, obviously, but, you know, we can blame Johnson & Johnson, and they say, well, they failed to report the issues that they saw. But let's be honest, the CDC and the FDA failed to do a decent enough investigation or challenge Johnson & Johnson enough on any of those products. They said they were safe. They reported they were safe. Doctors delivered those things. We talk about talcum powder, how many millions of babies had, you know, asbestos sprinkled on them, or women coming out of showers using shower to shower. This company is an abomination. So for those that want to trust them with the list of things that you just pointed out, Jeffrey, they don't even know about with this vaccine, including our big issue with the Highwire in our investigation, antibody-dependent enhancement, immune enhancement, or pathogenic priming, whatever you call it, another coronavirus vaccine that could potentially lead to death. I want to say potentially. There's a theoretical potential there. We're going to follow it. But what do we do if people start dropping dead next year when a new coronavirus comes along and their bodies and that vaccine acts as a catalyst to help the virus kill people when it wouldn't have killed them? It would have been more like the sniffles and cough that 99.6% of people are experiencing from the wild virus. Jeffrey, I want to thank you for getting into details there. Obviously, details that nobody is seeing on any of the mainstream propaganda stations that are funded by pharma. So great work on your investigation. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Del.
All right, Jeffrey, we'll see you next week. If you want to get deeper into some of these issues, go to our website, thehighwire.com, and check out the Jackson report. He gets into a lot more detail in articles that you can read. A really great resource there. And remember, this show has the greatest resource any news agency has ever provided, which is proof in your hands. Not in my lips, not on some screen you can't do anything about. If you want these studies, if you want that Johnson & Johnson trial in your hands to read to your friends and say, look, they don't even know if it stops the infection. They admit it right here. If you want to win your arguments that way, the best way to do that is just simply sign our newsletter. Go to thehighwire.com. untitled.com, put in your email, and right there, and every Monday you will receive every single piece of proof and fact and evidence that makes sure that we are not spreading misinformation, that we are detailing what is known scientifically. Please utilize that resource. If you're watching this show and just getting talking points but can't back them up, what good is that? So all you have to do right now, just give us your email. It's totally encrypted. We're not sending you ads for anything. So it's a huge, great resource and something that we love providing to you. Speaking of, though, injuries, whether it's Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Pfizer, Ben Stein, if you need some help, hopefully you live through this, but you should definitely be reporting your injuries, especially if it's something like Bell's palsy and your face seems to be sliding off of your skull, or you've had a massive allergic reaction, an anaphylaxis reaction, or someone you know has died. You need some help in knowing how to report that and what your options are, and we are here to help.
If you or a loved one has been injured after receiving a COVID-19 vaccine, including if you are a participant in a clinical trial, go to injuredbycovidvaccine.com. Submissions are confidential. We are here to help provide support, including connecting with medical specialists and potentially securing legal representation. To assure the safety of COVID-19 vaccines for everyone, it is imperative that every person injured by this product report their injury. We can provide assistance completing a report to the CDC's Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. So, if you or a loved one has suffered an injury from a COVID-19 vaccine, go to injuredbycovidvaccine.com now.
Now, obviously, we don't know if there's going to be any way to sue. We have huge protections around these products, but we are helping people fill out their VAERS reports. And if there's serious injuries involved, there are doctors out there that have been working on vaccine injury for a long time. We've already put some people in touch with those doctors so that maybe they can work their way through to getting back to a healthy life. These are all things that we do through the Informed Consent Action Network, which is made possible by your sponsorship and your work. This next story is really interesting for me because, as you know, I travel all over the country. I speak at state capitals. I speak to private groups. I speak at health conventions and things like that. But one of my favorite speaking opportunities has already happened a couple of times, and it led to a story I've told on this show. I was at NYU speaking to a classroom, and I said to them, you know, if there was a nonprofit that was the greatest nonprofit the world had ever seen, they heal the sick. In Africa, they have taken away the sewage out of the rivers and put in clean running water wells with filtration systems and bathrooms, and they've done it in India, and they've saved the rhinoceros and the monarch butterfly. There's nothing that this nonprofit hasn't achieved in making the world a better place. Only one slight problem. Once a year, this nonprofit takes a perfectly healthy child and sacrifices them. I want to ask you here in this class, and I did this at NYU, how many of you would donate or want to work for that nonprofit? Remember, everything it does is great, but once a year we have to sacrifice an innocent child. You know how many people raise their hands? That's right, 0. 0 would be part of a group that kills knowingly an innocent child, yet that's exactly what we accept with this vaccine program. We say the accepted casualties, killing innocent children to achieve herd immunity. There's only one teacher that's ever allowed me to go in and speak to a class that way at NYU. His name is Mark Crispin Miller. He is a bold and courageous professor that has been at NYU for over 20 years, and now his job is on the line. Why? Because he challenges his students to critically think. This is what it appeared like in a local news broadcast. Take a look at this.
An NYU professor who teaches a course on propaganda told his class that there is significant evidence masks don't help prevent the spread of COVID.
And as soon as NYU officials got wind of that, they weren't exactly pleased. Professor Mark Crispin Miller tweeted that NYU was displeased that he questioned masking in his online propaganda class. Another person responded to his tweet asking where they could find the abundant, significant evidence that masks don't prevent the transmission of COVID. While a university spokesperson responded in part by stating, amid reports about this online class, we have communicated directly with the students in it to remind them of the guidance from health authorities.
Well, at the center of this is really a set of tweets, and it appears to be one student that was really upset with what was being taught in this classroom. So let's take a look at the tweet. This is, obviously we blurred out this person, they deserve anonymity. At NYU University, an MCC tenured professor spent an entire class period telling students that wearing masks doesn't prevent the spread of COVID-19 and that hydroxychloroquine trials were made to fail so more people would be given the vaccine and have their DNA changed. He followed up that class by sending us links to anthraxvaccine.blogsport and radical.org/pandemic. I don't know what that ends up going on to say, as sources to back up his in-class arguments against masks and vaccines. I have forwarded the emails to the NYU bias hotline. The latter website links many far-right and conspiracy websites such as The Charlie Kirk Show, Zero Hedge, Technocracy News, Medicine Uncensored, Great Game India, WorldNet Daily, The Highwire with Del Bigtree, Global Research, What's Up with That, One News Now, and more. His own conspiracy website, News from Underground, MarkCrispinMiller.com, has articles such as growing research indicates many COVID-19 cases might not be infectious at all, and on the parallels between 9/11 and the COVID-19 crisis. Obviously, this student is very upset, and the school, I'm assuming one of Mark Crispin Miller's peers, responded this way in a tweet. Thank you for reporting this issue. We as a department have made this a priority and are discussing next steps. Well, to understand what's really going on here, I'm honored to invite onto the show right now Professor Mark Crispin Miller. Boy, you have really spun one up this time. I thought you would have achieved it when I went and spoke to your classroom a couple of times over the last several years, but nobody seemed like that I was, a big enough issue to try and get you pulled from the school. But give us a sense, right? This isn't a medical class. Why are you talking about masks? What is this class you're teaching and that I've spoken at? What's it about?
Well, it's a course on propaganda, which I've been teaching at least twice a year at NYU for maybe 20 years or more. It's always, heavily enrolled, extremely popular. And I have to say, it bears no resemblance to the account that you just kind of managed to tease out of those tweets and that appalling NBC news piece. Completely misleading, misleading.
Well, enlighten us. What is the class about?
Yeah, this is a course on the study of propaganda, which, unlike a lot of other academics, I do not teach just by going back in time and, talking about the Nazis and the Bolsheviks, maybe looking at the Allied propaganda in World War I. In other words, I don't teach propaganda as a kind of remote phenomenon and an academic subject. I teach it more in the spirit of a kind of necessary civic activity of questioning dominant narratives by looking at as much information as possible and making up your own mind. I did not tell my class, don't wear masks. In fact, I specifically told them that I was not telling them not to wear masks. I was not discouraging mask wearing. There's a very strict rule at NYU on that very point. I said, this is an intellectual exercise. I begin every propaganda course, every term, by making clear that my approach is one, again, of encouraging a kind of impartial and thorough study of dominant narratives by looking at as much information and data as possible. You have to do that. That's what I think higher education, and indeed lower education, should be all about, is teaching students how to think for themselves. And I said this last September, I said, now look at the way we're meeting this semester. We're meeting by Zoom. This is completely unnatural. Why are we doing this? Well, we're doing it because of the COVID crisis. And the COVID crisis has been driven by thunderous propaganda drives. And I made the point, propaganda needn't be nefarious, it needn't be false, it can be accurate, but it's always only a partial account of reality, okay? So I said we could, for example, study aspects of the COVID crisis. more specifically, we could study the mask mandates. You may be interested to know, and I encourage you to read, the 8, there are actually more than that. I didn't know this at the time. The 8 randomized controlled studies of mask wearing in hospitals by health professionals, all of which have found that masks are ineffective barriers against the transmission of respiratory viruses. I encourage you to read those. I will send the links. I also encourage you to read the more recent studies finding otherwise. And I gave them some guidance as to how a layperson might begin to assess the scientific soundness of a study. Okay, I won't go into that guidance now. We don't have time. But I mean, they're laypersons. They needed some advice on how to assess scientific studies.
Well,
So
are most professors really teaching students, if that's not your area of expertise, you're not capable of reading a scientific study? Is that the sense of what you're up against when you have a classroom of children or of actually young adult students? Do you have to tell them you're allowed to read a medical study and you're allowed to, there's ways to actually glean some information from it?
Well, that's actually a pretty big question. I mean, academia generally is over-specialized and people focus very narrowly on their own fields. But I felt obliged to let them know that they did have the right to look at, for example, scientific reviews of new studies. You can find those. I also suggested that they look at the universities where certain studies come from to see if they have financial relationships with Big Pharma or with the Gates Foundation, which would raise questions about whether there were conflicts of interest. This
You're
is just
teaching them critically thinking and really decent journalism, which I've been complaining about. Just how about investigate the source? Don't just take an expert for their word, ways that this is what we do on the Highwire, right? Let's dive deeper. Where can you look? This isn't, hidden in some basement somewhere or archive. This isn't, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it's been put in some museum that you'll never see it in a basement. A lot of this stuff's available to us.
Well, that's absolutely right. The students' tweets were a little upsetting. They weren't that big a deal to me because when you study propaganda, and when you make the effort, or I should say, when you encourage students to look at propaganda narratives in an impartial and thorough way, okay, you're basically telling them not just to look at the propaganda that they don't agree with, because anyone can spot propaganda if they don't agree with it. So you ask a liberal, what's propaganda? They'll say Fox News. You ask a conservative, what's propaganda? They'll say MSNBC. Well, yeah, they're both right. But the trick is to look critically at propaganda that pushes your buttons, okay? Yeah. This means, in other words, that you have to be prepared to move out of your comfort zone. You have to be prepared to question things you've taken for granted for a very long time. I mean, I've had to do this throughout my life. If you are alive and your mind is still active and growing, you're naturally going to question things you thought were true. And you do that once you begin to study propaganda. Okay, not every student can handle this. Right. Sometimes students get upset. This student is one of them. She got extremely upset. She didn't hear everything that I had to say on the subject. She only heard certain things, and she flipped out. Okay,
Now, is this a student that was in your class from day one? I mean, I've seen how you set your things up. You do a lot of caveats on what this class is going to be about.
Well, Del, let me make clear, she wasn't there from day one. She was a late arrival. So she missed a lot of the caveats, okay?
All right.
She only heard a resumption of the subject when it came up the following week. So she only heard part of the story, and she overreacted. What is troubling, and the reason why I'm on here today, is NYU's response to this, which was identical to the response of NBC Local News. That was my department chair who tweeted his thanks to her and publicly assured her that we as a department have made this a priority and are discussing next steps. Well, what is this? This is my termination. She tweeted that NYU should fire me for having dared to encourage the students to read the evidence that masks are ineffective barriers against respiratory viruses.
Wow.
My chairman publicly assured her that the whole department was taking steps to make this happen. I was not consulted. I am a member of that department. I think I may be the senior member of that department. Nobody said a word to me. His tweet is still up, although I asked him to take it down. The dean of the school and the doctor who advises NYU on COVID rules both tweeted my other students directly, emailed them the next day without putting me on copy, okay, and told them that I had given them dangerous misinformation and sent
Without
a list
asking you how that information was presented or what you actually put forward, went on assumption on a student they don't appear to know other than through tweets, and then making assumptions and then going to your classroom to say that you've been incorrectly teaching them.
Not only that, they did the opposite of what I do. They sent a list of what they called authoritative studies of masks from the CDC and told them to believe those. Okay, I never tell my students what to believe or what to think, never. Whatever's on my website, which is a separate issue, I don't tell my students what to think. These administrators did. And then finally, my chair pressured me into canceling the propaganda course for this semester. So I'm on medical leave. The stress of this whole ordeal has actually done me some physical harm. But if I were teaching, I would not be teaching that course. All right, this is what happened next. Because of these moves by my employer, I felt compelled to put a petition up at change.org with the help of some friends, because I thought that this was a colossal wrong. And not only did I do this on my own behalf, because I did feel wronged and persecuted for, basically teaching students how to think for themselves.
Yeah.
The petition explicitly makes this statement on behalf of academic freedom in the name of all those professors, all those journalists, all those doctors and scientists, all those whistleblowers and activists who have been gagged or persecuted for their dissidence, not just throughout the year of COVID, but for decades. I mean, this kind of thing absolutely has to stop. And all the petition did, in making that point, was to urge NYU to respect my academic freedom, all right? Now, what happened next is the most astonishing thing of all. And you'll know this because you've seen me teach yourself.
Yeah.
A month after the student attacked me, a majority of my department colleagues sent a letter to the dean of the school that I teach in, the Steinhardt School, demanding that he order an expedited review of my conduct in the classroom, which they argued is so heinous that it should nullify my academic freedom. So my colleagues, all right, without consulting me, again, nobody talked to me, made the bold move of urging the dean to examine my conduct formally. And more astonishing still, it wasn't just about my heresy on masks. They accused me of discouraging students from wearing them, right? And of intimidating students who did wear them, both total fantasy.
Yeah.
But they went on to say that I'm guilty of hate speech, attacks on students and others in our community, advocating for an unsafe learning environment, microaggressions, basically every sin in the social justice playbook, they accused me of, casting me as this kind of domineering right-wing conspiracy crank who makes proclamations about Sandy Hook and the moon landing was a hoax, who berates students who don't agree with him. This is a caricature that bears no relation whatsoever to the reality of how I teach. None of them has ever seen me teach. Now, as it happens, this review, which the dean immediately ordered, again, without talking to me first, all right? This review has prompted me to urge current and former students and visitors to my classes like yourself to send in letters of support, and over 50 have come in, and they're all on my website. The long and short of it, Del, is that I wrote a point-by-point rebuttal of all these accusations. I sent it to my colleagues. I asked for a retraction and an apology, all right? For the same reason I put up the petition, because this kind of thing has got to stop. They ignored my request. I sent a follow-up. They ignored that. So I felt I had no choice but to sue them for libel. And that's what I'm doing. And we're now at a crucial moment in that story.
Yeah.
My colleagues filed a motion to dismiss a few weeks ago. We responded with a brief demonstrating that their arguments are completely false. You know, they basically said, yeah, everything we said was really true, and we didn't really want to get him fired, so there's no libel. The brief demolishes their claims. I wrote my own affidavit that I encourage people to read. And then yesterday, as it happens, they sent a reply. So from this moment on, the judge could make a decision at any moment. He could ask for oral arguments from lawyers, or he could just decide. But the thing is, I want people to know, and I want in particular your audience to know what's going on here. Because this kind of thing has been going on much too much lately.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons, you know, we spoke yesterday, and I wanted to get you on the show right away, just as we have had Dr. Scott Jensen on from Minnesota, who clearly stated the issues that were going on with changing how the death certificate was reporting COVID cases in Minnesota. And it didn't matter that he was a sitting senator. It didn't matter that he, I think, was nominated or was Family Doctor of the Year in Minnesota the year before. It doesn't matter that you're 20 years at NYU with this course, challenging students to think on their own. I've been in your class. You challenge them to challenge you. It's a really open forum. It's a beautiful class. It's one of those classes that were those rare gold mines you'd find in school, whether it was high school or college or wherever, where you actually found that there was something exciting going on and true critical thinking, instead of just having to memorize and dictate back like parrots something that the teachers wanted you to know. So you've got this lawsuit going on. It's critical right now. Obviously, I never before thought that I would be into litigation, but that's what the Informed Consent Action Network does. We're not directly involved, but if you want to help Mark Crispin Miller's case, please do go to GoFundMe. This is, a teacher at NYU. He's I can tell, by the way that we had to configure your room, that you're not living in a mansion somewhere in the Hamptons. You're doing great work, and whether or not all of the studies that you shared are accurate, the point was it brings up discussion. And I know when we talked about this, you referenced in your class, I think it was Denis Rancourt, and he put together this great compilation of, I think it was 8 famous studies on mask wearing throughout the years. He, of course, got attacked, and I know some of the students pointed that out. And just to be fair, these tweets got both negative and positive responses. Here's some of the negative responses that came in from students. How did you come to this wacky conclusion? How long have you studied viruses? That's right, you haven't, so hush. I get a lot of that myself. Here are 2 facts. COVID-19 is not a flu-like respiratory virus. It is a very different virus with a very different epidemiology. Claims that masks are ineffective in preventing COVID-19 are propagandistic and contradict the public health evidence. Congratulations in torpedoing your career. Hopefully no one have to clean up the mess when you jump. Of course, you've had support too. Here's some of those tweets. I read the tweets from one of your students. It's shocking that they're complaining about being taught to think critical. It just goes to show that this could be a deeper issue, and it's possible this element of learning has somehow been missed in early education. Good for you. Kids need to think and ask questions about everything. Well, don't let that dissuade you. The pushing of the face diaper is one of the biggest propaganda campaigns ever. Keep questioning the narrative. Keep thinking aloud. So all, of course, and this is what's great, right? This is what I think NYU should be known for, right? Is creating dialogue, bringing this debate to the forefront. I'm honored that you would decide to bring this story to us. So again, can we still sign that the original petition? He only wanted 35,000. We're already at 29,000. Let's push this over the top this week. Let's show that we too want freedom of thought inside of our universities, and we want professors to be free to allow students to have debate over controversial topics. We can make a difference there. And for those of you that donate and make it possible to do what we're doing, obviously, if you've got a little bit of extra, maybe, you know, pitch in that latte or that coffee this week and go ahead and put that into the GoFundMe for Professor Mark Crispin Miller. We got to stop this, you know, and I know, you know, our good friend Mary Holland, professor at NYU, tenured, you know, teaching law for so many years, who's been so outspoken, works, you know, very closely with Robert Kennedy Jr. And Children's Health Defense. Because of that work and her statements and discussions, she lost her job at NYU. Obviously, this student must be very excited to be able to plant their flag on the mountaintop of cancel culture, but somebody's got to push back, and I'm glad that you are. For people that are professors out there, do you warn them against this, or do you think that other professors need to step up and really start speaking the truth? What is the future of education in America?
Well, there is no future for education in America if it's just training for compliance, you know, which is what my colleagues seem to think. I mean, one of them says in her affidavit that it poses a risk to what she called impressionable students to discourage them from wearing masks, which I never did. But to call them impressionable, it's very interesting. I think of them as adults. I think of them as young adults, and I see them as my intellectual equals. You know, they're not as widely read as I am. They're not trained to be educators, but I approach them as equals. I don't see them as impressionable toddlers who need to be protected from you know, some kind of disastrous mistake. You know, I urge them to think. I can't emphasize that strongly enough.
Yeah.
Now, to answer your question, there is no such thing as education if it does not entail questioning received opinion and official narratives. We're going to have a totalitarian system any minute. I mean, it's lowering all around us, even as we speak. The fact that we even have to have this discussion is actually a very bad sign that things are seriously out of whack here. So I would say to other professors, and I've heard from quite a few, not just in this country, who've been faced with similar attacks, you've got to fight back, you know, if you can. If you're able to fight back without getting fired, you know, if you're tenured, right?
Yeah.
You should deserve that tenure. I mean, tenure was instituted in the first place to protect academics who dared to do the kind of thing that I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
Those many professors who are tenured and simply toe the official line and engage in groupthink and even force that groupthink on their students, as some of the student defenders I've mentioned have pointed out, that my courses at NYU are unusual in that I don't push any kind of groupthink on the students. They actually referred to my class as a safe space where they felt free to question things that they're a little bit hesitant about questioning ordinarily. That's what education is supposed to be about. What we're witnessing now is this weird convergence of corporate and state interests on the one hand, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Big pharma, the Gates complex, those mighty powers. And then cancel culture, right?
Yeah.
Woke academics who use social justice dogma to persecute people who question certain pieties, right?
Yeah.
There's this weird kind of convergence. It's a little like the Cultural Revolution in China, you know, where student militants, you know, helped Mao to basically, you know, wipe out all resistance to his sway, you know? I mean, I didn't used to invoke, you know, communism in this way back when I was a regular leftist, but things have changed a great deal over the last year or so. And a lot of things I used to dismiss as right wing, you know, a lot of libertarian notions and the importance of freedom and so on. I've rethought, because again, rethinking things is a sign that your mind is alive and growing. You know, if you don't question anything you hear, you're kind of dead from the neck up, it seems.
Then why have a brain at all? I mean, any one of us can step into a line, and any one of us can be chained to the person in front of us and walk that line to wherever we're being guided to, whatever treadmill we're on, or whatever, you know, packing plant we want to stand in front of and just repeat over and over
Right.
again, what we're told. Mark, you're absolutely a beacon of light. You have been. I've been so excited the moments I've gotten to speak to your class. I know most of the students, I would probably guess all but almost one, are dismayed at what took place. And for the future of the students at NYU, I hope they make the right decision and recognize that free thought and discussion is our only way forward if we're going to be the great nation that we are, and the great institutions of education that people used to travel from around the world, from China, from Germany, from Korea, to come to America to really learn about freedom. So, I want to say to our audience out there, please, let's help Professor Miller out. If you can, go to change.org. Let's help out with this case so that he can prove that this is no way to handle Professor in court, which is where these things end up having to go when you are under attack by cancel culture. And definitely sign that change.org petition, because it's important not only for this case, but as you're saying, we bring on professors all the time, so many of them under fire for telling the truth, whether it's about vaccines or chemicals or sugar or cholesterol. We've reported on all of the bullying that's taking place in higher learning to shut people up. So Professor Mark Crispin Miller, thank you for sharing your story. Keep your head up. Know that at least our audience, and I'm sure everywhere else that you get a chance to speak, we stand with you, and we thank you for stepping up for critical thinking and free thought in this great nation and for those professors around the world.
Thank you, Del. Just right back at you. I'm an admirer of yours for the very same reason. Let me just add that this money is going into an escrow account that my lawyer is controlling, so I'm not going to be going off to Ibiza with the proceeds. This is all about the lawsuit.
All right, that's great to know. We wish you the best of luck, and I'll keep you in my prayers. Take care.
Thanks.
I mean, amazing that this is taking place. As he so well put it, the fact that this is even a discussion, or that we're having to have a conversation whether he's allowed to share these ideas with his students, shows us that America truly is hanging in the balance. We are waking up. These are the battles that must happen. We must challenge these moments. We must sort of pop this pimple of oppression and suppression and get back to health and what we knew to be true. So please help Professor Miller out. I want to talk about the fact that the great work we do here is made possible by you. There's another way you can help us out, both by sort of showing the world what you care about and where they can find it, while also seeing those proceeds come our way. Of course, I'm talking about the incredible store and merchandise that we are offering to you on our website. So take a look at this.
Introducing the all-new Highwire shop, where you can find your favorite studio gear essentials for everyone in the family.
We're out here today celebrating the release of our new Highwire gear. And so we've invited our Highwire community to show off the gear and see what we've got.
We're some of the biggest fans. I get a lot of news from the Highwire. He's really getting the stories that we're not going to see in the mainstream news.
Made from the highest quality hemp, bamboo, and cotton material. Be brave walking down the street as you support the work ICANN and the Highwire do every week to bring you the truth.
The Highwire is giving people information that they otherwise would not have access to.
Those guys do all the work for us, find the truth for us.
From t-shirts to hoodies to stainless steel water bottles and hats, there's something for every fan of the show, no matter how big or small.
They are out there seeking the truth.
You know that saying, the truth is what sets you free. They work hard to make the truth shine.
Order now. Just go to thehighwire.com and click shop.
Support the Highwire.
Awesome. I know many of you have visited our shop online, and maybe you saw that we sold out of a bunch of things. You saw that sold out square. We've restocked everything, so please take this opportunity to go and grab some of that merchandise. I'm really excited about the next person that's going to be coming into the studio here. Of course, I'm talking about Dr. Richard Bartlett, who brought about the Budesonide protocol, a way forward, a treatment to save people's lives, keep them from entering hospitals. We had him on the show before, back when this was the huge story down here in Texas. This is what that looked like.
As an ER doctor, you're wanting to stabilize your patient. And so if they come in and they tell me, I can't breathe, I'm going to try to help them breathe.
Right.
COVID is an inflammatory lung disease. Budesonide is an anti-inflammatory medicine for the lung. It blocks the release of all the inflammatory chemicals that are released with COVID. It's a perfect overlay. It's readily available. It's generic now. It's cheap. It's at every pharmacy on every corner in the United States. And when I started using it, I was shocked at how good it worked. It's almost like Budesonide was made for COVID-19.
We talked about the fact that nobody in America or around the world seemed to want a treatment at all. Vaccination was the only way forward, and that was represented by how the news from around the world treated the idea of budesonide. This is what that looked like in the media.
It's a treatment for COVID-19, used by an Odessa doctor who calls it the silver bullet. But others in the medical community aren't convinced it's what it's cracked up to be.
If it's being described as the silver bullet, and if you're hearing things about things that are just so perfect that it's too good to be true, it probably is.
There is no silver bullet at the moment, and there might never be.
There is no silver bullet response to the virus.
To think that that simple medication is the cure that could have saved 500,000 people.
Critics warn this is not how science works, and while they're thrilled that Dr. Bartlett has had some success with this treatment, he has clearly not had a large enough caseload to provide a true sampling.
There are people that are believe that budesonide and taking zinc is working. Is there any downside to doing it?
You know, there's a placebo effect to make you feel better and less anxious, but in reality, Matthew, it doesn't have any effect.
Basically, they were saying Dr. Richard Bartlett's a dreamer, that there's no way that this works, perhaps only a placebo effect. Well, to get to the bottom of what that was like, I'm sitting here with Dr. Richard Bartlett. It's awesome to see you again, man.
See you, sir.
You know, my first question would be, just as we saw the news roll out, you were doing a lot of media, including coming onto the Highwire. Did you ever go through med school and think, you know what I really want to do? I want to like come up with a treatment that gets me attacked, not just in the United States of America. I'd love the WHO weighing in. I mean, what we saw there was a full court attack literally from around the world.
It really was a full court press. I mean, Fauci, the World Health Organization, we had their attention last year, meaning, Del, that they were aware that budesonide against COVID was a possibility.
Do you think if it couldn't do anything or was useless, we would have even heard from them? They would probably just starve the story out, right?
Absolutely. This was actually censored, deplatformed. They deleted. We had a viral video that went 5 million views, and then YouTube pulled it. Over and over again, this was being buried. This was a treatment that was being buried. But Oxford just validated that 90% of hospitalizations and emergency room visits and even urgent care visits could be avoided if people were using early treatment with budesonide, which was my message a year ago.
Absolutely.
And just think what that means.
That's it. You've been vindicated, right? Well, let's take a look at let me look at some of this study right here. This is what it had to say. This is, I think you had headlines in, can we go to the headlines from Reuters? We already showed those when I wasn't looking. Reuters, Daily Mail, all reporting on it, but this is there it is. Common asthma drug cuts the need send COVID patients to hospital by 90% and shortens recovery time, Oxford University scientists say. And here's the actual study in MedRx IV, inhaled budesonide in the treatment of early COVID-19 illness, a randomized controlled trial. Here's some of we just pulled a couple of excerpts. Here's the results. Clinical recovery was 1 day shorter in the budesonide arm compared to the usual care arm. Proportion of days with a fever and proportion of participants with at least 1 day of fever was lower in the budesonide arm. Fewer participants randomized to budesonide had persistent symptoms at day 14 and day 28 compared to participants receiving usual care. And the conclusion, early administration of inhaled budesonide reduced the likelihood of needing urgent medical care and reduced time to recovery following early COVID-19 infections. It goes on to say, implications of all available evidence. The STOIC trial potentially provides the first easily accessible, effective intervention in early COVID-19. By assessing healthcare resource utilization, the study provides an exciting option to help with the worldwide pressure on healthcare systems due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Data from this study also suggests a potentially effective treatment to prevent the long-term morbidity from persistent COVID-19 systems. Take that, Fauci, take that, WHO. They keep saying, well, the science. Unfortunately, the science, and right, it has to be done. I mean, you were there, you were in clinical, it was somewhat anecdotal, but you were seeing it with your own eyes. Did you know this study was going on at Oxford?
You know, not when I started. Actually, I went with the science already. We had a paper that we wrote that cited 50 references from the NIH, from JAMA, from reputable sources. The evidence was there. We wrote a paper, published it, and it showed 2 + 2 = 4. Common sense, intuitive, healthcare. The budesonide is the answer. And it is the answer.
And when you look at this now, you look back, I mean, the attack you were coming on, Fauci, obviously, what was amazing, right? The attack on budesonide, which is a product that's in virtually every ER, it treats the lungs, it makes perfect sense, yet he is all behind a vaccine that hasn't been through any safety trials whatsoever, is not proving to stop the infection or transmission as far as we can tell. You know, that bias, but this whole thing was about the overrun of the ICUs, right? ICUs being overrun, the ER, we can't handle it, the flow. We were supposed to be 14 days flatten the curve. It's turned into 1 year of flattening the curve. Meanwhile, treatment is available. And what was it like to watch it come under attack knowing it could work?
I was very laser focused. I knew that I had something that worked. And so we were watching the headlines that the hospitals are overwhelmed, the hospitalizations. It was stopping regular care for cancer care, other types of care, surgeries, gallbladder surgeries, everything was put on hold. The hospitals were being overwhelmed. And this study, according to Oxford University, 90% of hospitalizations could be avoided with an early treatment with a medicine that's $3 a treatment, readily available at every pharmacy in the nation.
Still is.
Yeah.
So this didn't get sort of like outlawed or locked down or treated like we saw hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, this medicine's FDA approved 25 years ago. It's well documented to be an effective, safe strategy for decreasing inflammation in the lungs and airways. And that is what COVID is about. And so we put the science to the paper. We published a paper with 50 reference articles. The science was already there.
Yeah.
You know, just a couple days ago, we celebrated Texas Independence Day.
Right.
And the governor of Texas announced that he's going to restore our freedoms to us in a week. There is no Oxford University randomized controlled trial proving 90% success with mask mandates and all the other things that have been forced on the people, removing the freedoms and causing destruction and death.
You know,
but this has been out there for a year.
And you said you got laser focused. We have a great video that you took. Folks, this is Dr. Richard Bartlett reaching out to the office of Ted Cruz, trying to get someone inside the government to take a look at what he's proposing, what was working. This is just from inside, think your own home or your office. Take a look at this.
It's an anti-inflammatory. COVID-19 is a disease of inflammation. It's given as a respiratory solution to a respiratory problem. We're having 100% recovery. It seems like that would be something that you'd be excited about.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. And just to, you know, we're trying to sort of drill down into the ways in which we might be able to help or do some of our due diligence in getting a lay of the land for, you know, often when we're trying to affect these types of policy changes up here, you run into a ton of red tape and folks, asking you for making sure that we're dotting every I and crossing, every T on something. So we're trying to get a handle on as much as we possibly can. And then what we'll do after this is we'll get together, we'll share this with the senator, what we talked about, and then dig into, how we might be able to help and what the sort of, bureaucratic pitfalls might be up here in D.C. because it's been, frankly, and I'm sure you've experienced this as a practitioner, extremely difficult in many respects to move some of these, big agencies on some of these, creative and potentially very effective treatments, and any other, sort of.
I love that video because, as I've told many of you, I speak to politicians all the time. I fly all over the country, and that was about a 5-minute answer of, we're not going to do jack about this. We don't, how do I get you to get off of this phone call? Am I wrong?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's how it felt. And and to answer the unspoken question, no, I have not heard from Senator Cruz.
Really?
And
Shocking.
maybe he's working on it, and maybe he didn't get that information from his chief of staff.
Right.
But fortunately, the governor has science. The governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, has science to back his decision to restore freedom to Texans again. The science is there. Hashtag science.
Yeah.
Follow the science.
Yeah.
The science, I wrote a paper with citing 50 science articles back when I broke this story a year ago, and now it's breaking news again.
It's huge.
Oxford University.
But they're not reporting, right? We're not seeing this on CNN. We're not seeing this on MSNBC. We're seeing it Daily Mail. We're seeing international organizations are looking at, which is really a shame. When we watch that video, that's June. That's all the way back in June of 2020. When you look at this death rate and you think, had Ted Cruz or somebody, because he wasn't, I don't want to put it all on Ted Cruz or his office. You were talking to every politician that would listen. Nobody was going to do anything. Nobody was going to override Tony Fauci and the billions of dollars going into vaccination. We're now looking at 500,000 deaths they're claiming, which I think that's an exaggerated number. But when you look at that number, had someone listened, had the United States of America, had you gotten a meeting in there, at that time with Donald Trump, and maybe when they brought in Scott Atlas, had Tony Fauci said, you know what, this sounds really good, let's do this, where do you think the death rate would be right now?
They're saying 500,000. Let's just go with their number.
Okay.
According to Oxford University, 90% of hospitalizations would have been avoided.
Right.
That's 450,000 American lives, 450,000 fathers, mothers, sons and daughters that died, according to their numbers, from COVID. They're not dying falling over in the kitchen. If someone gets sick in the United States, our healthcare system brings people to the hospital. Most of those deaths are in the hospital. Potentially, does that mean 450,000 American lives could have been saved with a $3 treatment that's so safe it's used on 2-pound preemie babies, that's readily available at every pharmacy in the United States? A story that went viral and was censored and squashed and buried and then targeted by Fauci with the interview with McConaughey, targeted by the World Health Organization, instead of promoting it and saving lives.
And by the way, instead of just getting on the news, which if it's really science, you don't speak about something you don't know. How about the billions? Can you imagine if the billions of dollars that were sunk around the world into these experimental vaccines, what if we just took $1 billion of that and really focused it on treatments? Really said, hey, let's look at budesonide. Let's immediately start a budesonide trial here at the NIH. Let's start a hydroxychloroquine. Let's start an ivermectin trial. That would have cost tens of thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands, but we're talking billions of dollars going to one approach, and the fastest way out was products that were already in our hands, and nobody in our government seemed to want to do anything about it.
You're right. Nobody wanted early outpatient, inexpensive treatments.
Right.
No one was going to make any money off of this.
Right.
And the bottom line is we have breaking news. There's a way out of this pandemic.
Yep.
The numbers are going down.
Yep.
Because
do you think that's herd immunity? I mean,
it's herd immunity, and part of the herd immunity is early effective outpatient treatment strategies like budesonide, which has now been validated by Oxford University.
Yeah.
And so we're having survivors out there that have immunity. That's called herd immunity. What we had at the beginning, 90%, 9 out of 10 people who were treated with the standard treatment, which was hospitalization and being put on a ventilator, at the beginning of this pandemic, 9 out of 10 died.
Wow.
And so they weren't contributing to herd immunity. But this
right, death doesn't get us to herd immunity.
Early outpatient therapies like budesonide are being embraced around the world. And so this is causing us to have survivors that have immunity, and we're seeing the effect of that. The governor of Texas has science behind him. The naysayers to opening up our state and giving us our freedom are not looking at the science.
Right. I want to ask you a question. This is going to probably bring about somewhat of a conflict. I have said that basically this is a coronavirus. It's amongst the cold viruses that we have every year. We see the stats across the world right now. Worldometer showing 25 million current cases, and they described 99.6% of those as being mild symptoms. Cold, cold symptoms, sniffles, coughs, things like that. I get accused of sort of really underplaying how deadly and dangerous this is. I've always said there is clearly a small group of people. I describe that group as over the age of 65 with other comorbidities, but there are a couple of cases that fly in the face of that. We have had people very close to us that have tested positive and ended up getting very sick. And you are, by the way, we called you. I didn't bring in hydroxychloroquine. Everyone close to the Highwire that works with us or has come in with this, we sent them to you. You got the budesonide protocol going, but you got sick yourself. Do you have comorbidities?
I have no comorbidities. I don't take any medicines. I jog a mile on the treadmill in 7 minutes. I'm used to that. And when I got this disease, I got scared when I couldn't walk to the end of the block without being short of breath. And so this is a killer for some people. Now, this is not the flu. I've had the flu.
Yeah.
This is a killer for some people, and it's not a normal coronavirus. I am convinced that some of the senators that have talked about a bioweapon possibility might be correct, that this has been chosen by choice because it's highly contagious.
Yeah.
And so there are genetic factors. As a doctor, I can't use a broad brush to treat every patient. I have to treat the individual. And that's why it's so dangerous when you have the government telling you what to do for your personal health care and overriding your personal physician and yourself and making your treatment decisions. When the government says, wait till you have severe symptoms and just stay home and tough it out with Tylenol, with this particular disease, we saw what that did. According to their numbers, 500,000 deaths.
Yeah.
But you juxtaposition that with what Oxford University has proven. They had to cut their study short, Dell, because it's unethical to let people die when there's an effective treatment strategy.
So they just started treating everybody. I saw that. I was wondering what it meant. It said basically we left the treatment early because it was obvious what we were seeing. So they eventually said we're not going to deny people budesonide any longer.
You can't. Ethically, when you have a randomized controlled trial, which is the creme de la creme, top shelf evidence of scientific medical fact.
Yeah.
That's what this was. Oxford University, the oldest university in the English-speaking world since 1096, 72 Nobel Prize laureates. That's where this information was validated and where I was vindicated, really, because I was attacked.
You were. I agree. Let me just ask you, when we look back in history will have to go through the data. It's going to have to look at this. That data's been, in many ways, I think, corrupted by changes in death certificates and but hopefully doctors still recorded enough information, even though heart disease was no longer the cause of death. It was COVID. Dying from meant you were dying with, but hopefully that heart disease is still on the paperwork so we can really go back and look at this. But how do you think this year that we've been through will be looked at? Because we keep hearing scientific evidence, the evidence of mass, the scientific, and it's being this mantra drummed by mainstream media, but it really appears that a lot of the scientific experts were speaking about things they didn't know anything about, or actually did and were actively out against budesonide, against hydroxychloroquine, against ivermectin, as you said, against treatments that were pennies on the dollar and wouldn't lead to a worldwide vaccination program and putting us on this conveyor belt.
People lost their mothers, their fathers, their sons, their daughters during this pandemic. January 2020, the American healthcare system that used to be the best in the world was hijacked. And we had actors playing a role, promoting propaganda, which obviously failed when we look at how many deaths there were, how many hospitalizations, how many bankruptcies. And and I believe an objective view in the future will see that this could have been avoided in large part, because now Oxford University has validated and had to cut their study short because they didn't want to be responsible for unneeded deaths. But we had, they're saying 500,000 Americans died. 90% of that, if they die in the hospital, which is where they're dying, there's been a shift of where people die. They're not dying in nursing homes. They're not dying at home. They're dying in the hospital. 90% of the hospitalizations could have been avoided. That would be 450,000 American lives, potentially.
I agree. I think that we're going to look back. There should be some real trials for crimes against humanity. You have been on the forefront. You are one of the heroes. It's exciting to bring you back on, allow you to be here, take a victory lap. You deserve that.
Thank you. I'm going next to the Texas Senate. I was just invited by a senator to speak to their committee about COVID. And so we'll be there the 15th is what it sounds like. But, you know, I've met with governors, and when I talked to the governor of Oklahoma, I heard the same thing over and over. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And I said, and I told him, you know, at some point, if your healthcare advisors have not told you this, is it because they don't know, or is it because they don't want you to know?
Right.
And that's where we've been. We need new advisors. If you're a government leader, you need to be held accountable for this. Breaking news that we can end this pandemic. Early, effective outpatient strategies are available. Oxford University confirmed it.
That's it. Yeah, Dr. Richard Bartlett, you are a hero. You are on the front lines. I think history will record this incident and your time in it kindly. Where do we find, what website do we go to see what you're up to or follow your progress?
There is a website, budesonideworks.com,
B-U-D-E-S-O-N-I-D-E,
budesonideworks.com, and that has it has testimonials and articles from COVID scientists, from professors, from patients, from doctors, validating this, proving this.
Great.
We've had patients with one lung and emphysema recover. I had a patient with 2 forms of cancer on chemotherapy, had radiation. She still is dealing with that with her chemo, but she beat COVID. So this is a dangerous disease for some people, but there's a way out of this.
Fantastic. Keep up the great work, and we're going to continue to spread the message. There you have it, budesonideworks.com. If you look at there, even though we're coming out of this, we're reaching herd immunity. I still know some people right now that have come down with COVID. It's still going to be out there. There will be next season. These are flu and cold seasons. I think these things are getting more intense, whether there's laboratories involved or not. I believe there are ways forward, and I think the focus should always be treatments over vaccinations. We're seeing the failure of vaccinations. We're seeing they're already making booster shots because they can't keep up with the variants. That's the natural world at work. But as we close this, I want you to ask yourself, what got us here? What is the real goal? Have we just let a bunch of hypochondriacs decide how we're going to live in this world? Are we going to truly hide and mask? Because what is the attack by mainstream media? It was proved they were wrong about Florida. Florida did just fine. Now they're dreaming and praying that Texas will fail the experiment in opening up. What is the goal? Is it to wear masks every year, all year, or maybe just during flu season? Well, this is Dr. Paul Offit giving us a hint of what his dream would be about our future and future flu seasons. Take a look at this.
Is we figure out what flu strains have been circulating in places like Australia or South America, which sort of predicts what strains are likely to come into our country. There's been so little flu in those 2 areas, I think it's going to be hard for us to try and figure out what flu strains to pick. But you're right. If we mask and social distance every winter, we will see a dramatic reduction in flu, which usually causes hundreds of thousands of hospitalizations and tens of thousands of deaths. I wonder whether that will be the lesson from this.
There you have it. What they really want to do is mask us every flu season. Doesn't matter that I lived the last 50 years of my life without having to do that. My kids are healthy. I was healthy. Everyone I knew was healthy. Sure. There's always been people that needed to, live in a bubble, that were extremely sick, had comorbidities. But are we all going to live in bubbles? Are we going to be in band practice, living in our bubbles? Is this the world we really want to live in? How do we stop this? How do we make a difference? Folks, we've got to stop stop being sheep. We've got to stop saying, okay, whatever you say, because frankly, we don't even question who's giving that information. There was a guy that went outside of a grocery store with a lint brush and just made everybody get linted down before they walked in, and nobody questioned this guy. Look at this. Everybody, fine, yeah, is this where we're at? I guess so. I didn't hear Abbott tell me I had to get lint brushed, but this guy's telling me so. We've got to stop responding to authoritarianism that way. We've got to make a difference. And for everyone in Texas or Florida or any of the other Georgia, the 15 other states that are not masking, that are open, we have to make a difference now, and this is what it is. We don't need to be a part of cancel culture. We don't need to be part of a cancel cult, as Cole very well put it on my staff earlier this morning. We are not a cult, but what we are is we are voting with our dollars. If you live in Texas, if you live in these places, you must go to the grocery store that allows you to not wear a mask. You must go to the restaurants that allow you to not wear a mask. You cannot keep saying, well, it's convenient, that store is right down the road that, makes me wear a mask. We make the difference now. We've got to stand with those governors that have made this decision. We've got to show the world. We're not going to allow them play a hidden ball or mathematical game with us. They can't make up the fact that the vaccine somehow did it when we know it's not. We've got to stand now and show the world that not wearing masks, not being locked down is the best way forward, that this will always have the standard arc of a cold or flu season. Every one of you out there, the Highwire listeners and watchers, we can make a difference now. Stand for what you believe in. Do not go to any place, no restaurant, no grocery store, but benefit and put your energy behind those stores and those businesses that believe in freedom in this country, believe in your medical freedom. Let's show the world. Let's make a difference. This is our marching orders. We now have an opportunity to show that Texas will do better than everyone else by opening up and letting freedom reign. That's what we have sold you from the beginning. We have brought you the truth. I'll even bring you doctors that will say that COVID-19 can be very dangerous for some people. We're not trying to manipulate the truth. We're trying to show you where and how to find it. This is the Highwire, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the Highwire insiders who make this show possible. If you'd like to become a Highwire insider, then go to our website, thehighwire.com, and sign up now. And please, share the show. We're on Instagram, Twitter, BitChute, and now on Roku. Because knowledge is power, censorship is real, and we need all the help we can get.